Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called A Mother's Moment, written by Dark Prince 010. Miss Sam, were you aware of the effects of the drug administration device you were using on the morning of November 11th, 2144? Lee Zhang, still a little bit tired from the hectic morning before being called in for questioning, was sitting on a small chair and doing her best to keep herself calm. It's just one of those multi-farmer bracelets. I'm not really sure. Until that morning, I hadn't thought that it was anything different than what all my friends and family had. Maybe a different manufacturer, but that was about it. Investigator Trey Hicks put both sets of hands on the table, his claws scratching the metal quietly in annoyance. But he could see that Miss Zhang wasn't the type to jailbreak one of these farmer bracelets for something like manufacturing an artificial and dangerous high. There were those out there, of course, who would do their best to break the systems, making them deliver whatever cocktail they pleased. And those were the ones he tended to be worried about. You never knew what combination someone would stumble across that would hype them up out of their mind, then send them into a violent rage, or just straight up kill someone. The medical investigation group at this precinct was usually fairly uneventful, but every once in a while there were snippets of excitement, such as what happened the morning of November 11th, 2144. Do you recall the settings you were using on your bracelet at the time, Miss Zhang? She cocked her head, thinking and murmuring, I think it was just normal stuff. A low dose of aspirin, some citalopram for my depression, an estradiol finasteride cocktail, and I think maybe there was a trace of melatonin for trying to get some sleep earlier. Nothing exotic, nothing off-world. He nodded. He already knew all of this, having pulled the diagnostics off her farmer bracelet on the morning of the incident. It was still good to confirm that she wasn't being dosed with something unexpected. Well, we think that we have a pretty good idea of where the issue may be coming from. These bracelets operate on a very thin margins and can be very sensitive to artificial fluctuations. If you inject yourself with something extra through a manual syringe, it can often throw off the sensors and result in a feedback loop. No, nothing like that. I'm really not a huge fan of shots, so no way I would want to take anything extra. Hell, she said. The farmer bracelet was supposed to help reduce the amount of shots I needed. It was one of the reasons why I was so eager to get one. The inspector pulled up a notification he had received a few days ago, fully a week after the morning of the incident. I'm assuming that you had not received this alert either, he asked. Lee leaned forward and shook her head and murmuring, I wonder if that's why it happened. The alert was for a recall for that particular brand of farmer bracelet manufacturer. Apparently, it had been linked to a number of overdose deaths several systems over. Although, of course, the recall notice had been sent through normal subspace rather than a much more expensive hypermail. As a result, the recall took months instead of hours to reach them. It was very unfortunate about the people who had died from the overdoses. But you not only didn't die, but have appeared to have suffered no long-term ill effects. The inspector's face had disbelief written across it. Lee shrugged. I felt crummy the next day, and I had a headache for a couple of days, but, other than that, nothing. Trix pulled out the readout from the details of the recall. It says here that the problems arose from the default settings from the farmer bracelet being applied to all drugs in inventory. Unfortunately, it was originally used for a human condition called beatus. Lee piped in, probably diabetes. It is, or at least it was, a relatively common, acquired, or inherited human condition. Now it's less so, but I can still imagine there's quite a market demand for it. He wrote that down as a note on the margins before continuing. Well, in any case, it looks like the problem arose from the fact that the default setting for this diabetes is to release a hormone in question, but it appears the body is already releasing that same hormone. Unfortunately, for other species, we don't really overproduce much of anything. And so it looks like there were multiple vital organ failures and hyperproduction and saturation of the chemicals when their bodies just couldn't handle it. She shrugged and just chalked up another weird thing that humans were an outlier on. The farmer bracelet, I see, was collision protected as well, right? It seemed like it was going to be a small cost to upgrade, and I thought it was worth it. I know cars are safe nowadays, but you never know. I see, said the inspector. The product information says that this particular type puts out a hardened layer over the skin to protect it from abrasions and blunt false trauma, rather than the older quick inflate versions. Some kind of chemical compound using one of the delivery microchannels to provide the hardened coating microseconds after impact. Only lasts a few seconds, but I suppose that's all you really need for that sort of scenario. Lee winced, feeling the ache in the scabs over her knuckles, where the coating hadn't managed to fully prevent all of the damage. So, would you like to tell me what happened that morning? Well, as I said in the initial report, I was taking my son to school. We had been crossing the street when we saw his bus was coming. That was an arterial street, and it looks like here the record shows you were jaywalking rather than using a crosswalk. Lee nodded guiltily. Yes, we were in a hurry, and I didn't think that we would have time to make it to the crosswalk. Well, normally this wouldn't be that big of a problem, except for the vehicle that was coming crosswise at you. She nodded. That's true. The truck came out of nowhere. I thought we looked both ways, but it came out of nowhere. Yes, an armored hover truck belonging to the Empire of the Sweeping Arm Bank. So I'm guessing at that point you had split second where you were quite frightened. Oh, for sure, Lee said. But the main thing I was worried about was my kid. In that split second, all I wanted was to protect him. Well, the inspector said, drawing out the word as he pulled open the portfolio of pictures taken at the incident. A significant dent had been made in the front of the vehicle, and there was clearly visible cracks in the armored plating fully all the way up the vehicle's roof and partway down the back adjacent to the doors. Well, at that point, the drug administration softwares had kicked in, matching what looks like you humans call adrenaline, and produced a dose far in excess of what humans would normally produce. Mostly, the thing I'm not understanding is that it already says that the reason why it gave you such a high degree of dosage was that it was matching your blood levels, and your levels were far in excess of the average human adrenaline response. Lee nodded, but her eyes drifted up through the windows of the conference room and out to her son, who was sitting idly, kicking his feet on a chair in the lobby and playing on his communicator. Well, mothers respond a little differently when our kids are in danger. Inspector Tix nodded slowly, as if he understood. He had been born from an egg and had never met the Queen in person, so he couldn't really relate. Still, he could understand that for many species there was a much stronger maternal drive than his own. So yes, it looks like your father bracelet system provided not only a high drug dosage, but also the protective coating to your hands as you struck the vehicle. Lee nodded again. I just remember pushing out, hoping to protect us. I didn't really expect it to work, and I was pleasantly surprised when it did. But I was still so freaked out and stressed that... The inspector cut in. That's when you punched forward again, striking the vehicle. I hope you're aware that it had totaled the vehicle, cracking both the vehicle's outer body, as well as denting a number of core parts within the anti-gravity generator of the truck. The bank has agreed to not press charges for your jaywalking. And as an aside, he added, probably because they were also caught doing double the speed limit in that particular zone. This caused Lee to gasp in realization, and then slowly consider the new information before shrugging. Well, I'm not injured in any significant way. Nothing that I think I'll have to worry about, so I suppose that's fair. The inspector nodded, bracing himself. So I think that just leaves us with the question of what we want to do with that farmer bracelet. Oh, that silly old thing, yeah. I think I just threw it away after the incident, she spoke quickly, and the inspector narrowed his slit eyes. For a moment, she refused to meet his gaze. Miss Zhang, I have to remind you that this is a dangerous device, and could pose a risk to everyone nearby if we don't have it in our possession so that we can safely disable it and destroy it. Lee nodded, half listening to the inspector's words, as her gaze came back again to her son. I don't think, she paused, then began again. I must say that in my particular case, it protected me and my child. I just happened to take advantage of the fact that some engineer somewhere did a math problem wrong, and that math problem complements human physiology pretty damn well. I'll keep your request in mind, Inspector, but until then, is there anything else? The inspector sighed. That is all. I'll be in touch if anything else comes up, but until then you're clear to leave. Thank you, sir, said Lee, and she stepped out to greet her excited child, tossing him in the air with a swirl as they discussed going to consume frozen dairy refreshments. The inspector sat in the room for some time after, going over the paperwork. The one thing that had startled him was seeing just how quickly Lee had been able to respond, and how quickly the drugs had saturated her system before she struck that blow at the truck. The readout from the farmer bracelet device was saying that her pulse rate was at 210 beats per minute on average for the entire incident. That already had him in disbelief, as most creatures going above 180 on their primary circulatory organ would result in cramping, catastrophic failure, and typically death. But his eyes drifted again away from the average BPM and towards the spike. In the moments before she had struck, the readout was saying, if these could be believed, 440 beats per minute. At that point, her heart would have been less of a pump and more of a hum, something flooding her entire system almost instantaneously with an illicit combat drug that humans managed to skirt around regulations by virtue of the fact they produced it naturally. He closed the report with a single line, "I do not believe Miss Sang was acting inappropriately or in any sort of illegal fashion, but I would request that this be added to the records, that in case it was already not painfully aware, under no circumstances get between a human mother and their child." End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Casper Arnholtz, Draxzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.